I'm Stuart Varney.
I'm Harris Faulkner.
I'm Brian Kilmeade, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, July 14th, 2021. I'm Dave Anthony. It's a growing COVID debate. Can companies or schools make the vaccines mandatory? There's a big push for it and against it.
So if you believe that the mandatory vaccination is not based on science, that it's not reasonable, you can challenge it on that basis. But the courts have been highly deferential in the government's determination that a vaccination is needed.
I'm Lisa Brady. 2 U.S. presidents said the end was coming in Afghanistan. But now that it's happening, the speed is turning heads.
The rapid departure of the U.S. troops, in the view of many here, has got people concerned. And in fact, that's considered a real reason why we're seeing this uptick in fighting between the Taliban and Afghan government forces.
And I'm Jimmy Failla. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
160 million Americans are fully vaccinated, but nearly a third of adults have yet to get a COVID vaccine dose. On Sunday, Biden advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci said he's in favor of local mandates, telling ABC's This Week,
viruses and public health don't know the difference between a Democrat or Republican.
With rising cases in low vaccination rate areas, President Biden caused controversy last week, saying we need to knock on doors. Press Secretary Jen Psaki clarified.
This is not federal employees going door to door. This is grassroots volunteers.
She also said there will be no federal vaccine mandate, but many Republicans say enough.
We need to stand up strong for the liberties that protected us as Americans.
Congressman Chip Roy tells Fox
it's our duty as Americans, our patriotic duty, to make decisions for ourselves.
That has led some Republican-led states to pass or consider laws barring vaccine passports or mandates requiring the shots.
The CDC has sweeping authority to mandate conditions in federal facilities. There's more of a controversy as to how far that can extend.
Jonathan Turley is a professor of public interest law and a Fox News contributor.
President Trump and President Biden both have suggested that they could dictate things to the states as to mandating vaccines or other types of conditions. That's not entirely clear. I mean, the public health was primarily left to the states. The courts tend to be very deferential, but there could come a point where they could have difficulty on a constitutional basis. What's clear is that the Biden administration does not want to mandate the vaccine.
At the same time, Professor, my question, Dr. Anthony Fauci over the weekend had said that they would support, though, on a local or a state level, a push to make this and mandate this. And a lot of this issue is being played out on those levels. There are lawsuits and all kinds of laws being put on the books in states.
That's right. And I think that's the preference of the administration, is to rely on the states, but particularly private businesses. We had a number of statements from the White House signaling to private businesses that they think it'd be a good idea to mandate proof of vaccination for movie theaters, restaurants, and other types of businesses. We also had a CNN analyst just 2 days ago say that we have to make life as difficult as possible for anyone who's not vaccinated to make this an easier choice. So you're going to see a lot more of this ramped up pressure coming particularly from private sources. Like Morgan Stanley just said that all their employees must be vaccinated to work in the office, and you're going to see some states moving in that direction.
There are laws now in some states to prevent employers from doing that. And in some cases, putting them on the same level as protected classes, like people who are protected by religion or something that they cannot control. Obviously, you can control whether you're vaccinated or not.
Yes, I think this is part of the pushback. I mean, when you look at if you actually crunch the numbers, you get an idea of why the administration and Democratic leaders are pushing this. Because despite all of the media hammering away at the need to get vaccinated, people are not doing it. And so now you're beginning to hear, like this analyst say, well, we just need to make life as hard as possible on anyone who doesn't want to be vaccinated. And that's triggering these laws that you're talking about, that the response from some of these states is not in this state.
Back up and take COVID out of the equation. I mean, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has guidelines. They have let employers set vaccine mandates for measles and mumps and various diseases in the past. Schools have not allowed students in for having no vaccinations for some of those diseases. Why is COVID different?
Well, it's not legally different. If employers like Morgan Stanley want to require vaccinated workers, I think courts would uphold it. They may have issues with people with religious objections. That's where the more difficult cases could come up. But for most employees, they could be forced to be vaccinated or have to give up their jobs. And even if they get an exception, the CEO at Morgan Stanley, for example, clearly indicated you're not going to be an employee in good standing with them. So they probably can do that. And in 1905, the court ruled in the Jacobson case that Massachusetts could require a vaccination for smallpox. The law said if you didn't get a smallpox vaccine, you had to pay $5. And the court upheld that.
$5. Wow. What a difference 116 years makes as far as our finances. But back to when it gets to the workplace, Houston Methodist Hospital, they fired about 150 people who refused to get the mandated vaccine. That was upheld in court.
Yes, and I think that is what we're going to be seeing across the board. I think that there is clearly an ability of businesses to stipulate that. Also, businesses, unless there's a countervailing law in the state, can probably bar people from entering their business without proof of vaccination. So that's why this is shifting over to these laws. It's saying we don't want pandemic passports to be used in a given state. So I think this fight is going to increase because to some extent, I think the White House has been surprised by the degree of vaccination hesitancy. There's literally nothing the federal government has not tried to get people vaccinated short of a mandatory vaccination. So this is a big political issue. I mean, they're very close to a key midterm election. And I think the Democrats don't want to fight this until just on the other side of 2022.
Obviously, there's strong rhetoric and opinions on both sides, but some who claim that the vaccine mandates go too far have likened this to Nazi experiments in the 1940s. I mean, that seems a stretch.
Yeah, it is. It's a terrible stretch, and it's an insult to people who were victimized or their families victimized during that period. It's not the same thing. We can have disagreements as Americans about whether you should be forced to be vaccinated. I think there's good arguments on both sides, and I really believe that. I mean, there's some people that look at this and they say, we don't feel comfortable with our family getting this. We're willing to take the risk. On the other hand, the government's looking at the Delta variant and a number of other variants that are really causing concern in places heavily vaccinated.
On Tuesday, a group of 7 healthcare organizations called on medical facilities to make COVID vaccines mandatory for workers. A Children's Hospital of Philadelphia director upset that some people refuse the shots was quoted in the Washington Post saying, "It is not your right as a citizen to catch and transmit a possibly deadly infection." Professor Turley's response?
Well, I don't think it's a right to be not vaccinated. It's a right to be able to follow your religion. There's some people that have religious objections. Also, you have a right to be free of arbitrary government conduct. So if you believe that the mandatory vaccination is not based on science, that it's not reasonable, you can challenge it on that basis. But the courts have been highly deferential in the government's determination that a vaccination is needed.
Are we going to get some sort of Supreme Court case in a couple of years that deals with this and sets rules or standards or something?
I expect the court would uphold most of these vaccination requirements, certainly by private businesses and by the states. So it's not clear they would accept certiorari to accept review, but the ones to look for are those challenges based on religion.
And what about the challenges that ultimately will come in the states that are banning vaccine mandates or trying to?
Yeah, now on that could be really interesting, and I think that the states have the advantage on that, unless the CDC comes out and says we have to have mandated vaccinations. then we could have a serious issue here. But once states pass laws like that, then it takes a big dog to fight a big dog, and that means the federal government would have to come in and say, we want to preempt this.
Now, he mentioned President Trump. Now we pick Professor Turley's brain on the lawsuits the now former president has filed against social media companies claiming he and other conservatives are being censored.
There is no better evidence that big tech is out of control than the fact that they banned the sitting president of the United States earlier this year.
Democrats argue the former president spread lies and conspiracy theories and helped stoke the deadly January Capitol attack.
Well, first, I should note that his lead lawyer, John Cole, is a very good lawyer, called me a number of times about this lawsuit, and I talked to him about the constitutional basis. In my view, the president clearly has an injury, as do many other people. What the social media companies have done here is wrong. They've engaged in raw censorship. They've engaged in highly biased censorship. They've essentially taken sides on political, medical, and social controversies. So there's an injury there. What's missing is a real cause of action. I don't believe that the case will be successful, not because they don't have a legitimate gripe, but it's very hard for a court to get to where they want it to go. What they're saying is that because of Section 230 that grants immunity to these companies, and because of all the pressure, particularly from Democrats, for them to engage in censorship, they have become, that is the social media companies, state actors, that they're no longer private companies. They're surrogates for the state. And by the way, that is a perfectly plausible narrative. I happen to think it's correct in a number of respects. There is coordination going on. It's open. There have been Senate hearings where Senate Democrats have pressed these CEOs and said, we need you to engage in what they call robust content modification, which is the Orwellian term used for censorship. The problem is that legally, I think a court would find it very hard to say that they're not state actors technically. So I think the odds are stacked against the president.
All right. So basically, because they're private companies, they can do what they wish, correct, ultimately?
Yeah, the funny thing is that the Democrats have opposed free speech for corporations. That was their rallying cry, was that Citizens United is such a terrible decision when the Supreme Court said that companies have free speech rights. But when it comes to social media companies censoring this material, suddenly these same members of Congress are saying, oh, well, no, corporations have free speech rights.
Big tech, of course, has an army of lawyers, and they've been successful fighting different lawsuits against them, including recently a federal judge throwing out attempts to go after Facebook for being like a monopoly on social media. So they're pretty successful, aren't they, in court?
They are, and the monopoly cases are the same problem. They do act like a monopoly. The problem is that they're a new type of monopoly. They don't fit the classic definition of like a Standard Oil. And I think we have to re-examine our antitrust laws because this is a dangerous thing. It is very dangerous to have so much power held by Google, Apple, Twitter. They're literally controlling political debate in the United States. And that should be a concern to everyone.
Jonathan Turley, Fox News contributor, professor of public interest law at George Washington University. Always good to talk to you. Thanks for being with us.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
This is Jimmy Failla with your Fox News commentary coming up.
The U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan is now more than 95% complete. An updated estimate from U.S. Central Command on Tuesday, just a day after the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan, General Scott Miller, gave up his post, passing the reins to the head of Central Command, Marine General Frank McKenzie, until the mission ends next month.
This ceremony marks an important milestone in the transition of our involvement in Afghanistan, but it's not the end of the story. It's rather the end of a chapter.
McKenzie offering reassurance about the U.S. commitment to its Afghan partners, even as security concerns rise, along with the amount of territory and border crossings being seized by the Taliban. The UN's refugee agency is warning that Afghanistan is on the brink of another humanitarian crisis, with more people forced to leave their homes this year and more civilians injured in fighting.
Conditions in Afghanistan are not great. We've been here on the ground for several days now and seeing reports across the country of the Taliban militants clashing with Afghan troops.
Greg Palcott, senior foreign affairs correspondent for Fox News, is in Kabul.
The common estimation right now is that the Taliban has control of at least a third of the country and that they're contesting another third. That is a whole lot. So far, the fighting has not entered in full fashion the capital of Kabul, where we are right now. But there were scattered reports of assassinations and an IED blast, which left people dead. So that's getting people nervous here, Lisa.
There had been a Russian news agency report about a statement from the Taliban's political office saying that they're not attempting a military takeover of the country. Is anyone there buying that?
No, no one really is. We talked to a leading politician, and she told me that the Taliban hasn't changed, and you can't trust the Taliban with anything. There are no signs that they are going to let up on the fighting. The only indications we're getting is that peace talks could be resuming between the Taliban and the Afghan government in Doha. That's where they've been going on for the last few months and, in fact, years. No sign that this could be any kind of breakthrough, but if these reports are correct, it could mean that the Taliban is sort of angling for position diplomatically on the battlefield, Lisa.
What about the Afghan capital, Kabul, where you are? Is it fair to say that it's not what many Americans might expect?
This city, Lisa, has changed quite a bit in the last 20 years. When I was first here, when the Taliban were running things, it was pretty backward. But now, since the Taliban has fallen and there have been semi-modern governments here, there's been a real pickup in business. There's been a real pickup in construction, and there is a hectic scene of traffic here. Again, people are all watching all of these reports of fighting going on around the capital very, very closely. And I've got to tell you, and we've talked to folks a lot in the last several days, they are very, very nervous.
In Kabul, though, in the city where there isn't fighting, what is a typical day like? I mean, is it just like any other city where, you know, people are going to work, going home, going to the store? They have a lot of freedom there?
There is a lot of traffic. I can say that, number one, coming from New York originally, it reminds me a little bit of Midtown Manhattan, but just a little bit crazier. And people are going about their business. What we've been highlighting is...
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.